Montana Territory, 1883. The wind cut sharp through the Bitterroot Valley when Susanna North dragged the first log toward the clearing. It was late spring, the earth still damp from snowmelt, and her palms were raw from weeks of labor. She had no man, no help, and no plans to ask for any. Just her own 2 hands, a hammer, and the aching need to build something that no one could take from her. Not like before. The land was hers now, 80 acres of thick wooded rise and open meadow, all deeded legal just west of Stevensville. It had taken every cent she saved working as a seamstress in Butte. She had traded lace and silk and the company of men who thought they owned her smile for a patch of wild ground and a promise she made her mother on her deathbed: never marry for safety. Build your own. So she did. Susanna was 27, with grief still tight behind her ribs and a stubborn streak that ran deeper than the roots of the pine trees she chopped down one by one. She moved like someone who had survived too much to flinch at loneliness. She worked until her hands bled, slept under canvas, and kept a Spencer rifle within reach. She built her cabin 1 log at a time. And she never saw the man watching her from the ridge. Perrin Grady had not planned to stop. He had left his ranch near Hamilton a week earlier, saddle-weary and hollowed out from the weight of a house that had been too quiet for too long. He was 34, a widower for nearly 4 years, and father to 2 children who needed more than what he had been able to give since their mother died in childbirth. Hayden was 9 now, quiet, always watching. Hallie was 7, sweet but quick to tears. They stayed with his sister in Missoula while Perrin tried to decide if he was still a man or just a shadow of one. The sight of a woman dragging a log across the clearing brought him to a slow halt. She was alone. No wagon, no men helping. Her dress was plain, sleeves rolled to the elbow. Her dark brown hair was pinned up tight, but strands had fallen free across her cheek. She stood up straight, breathing hard, and stared at the half-built wall like it had insulted her. He watched her lift the next log. And he could not ride on. He came back the next day. And the next. But it was on the 4th day when he found her sitting in the dirt, her boot pinned beneath a collapsed beam, face pale with pain. "Do not touch me," she hissed through gritted teeth when he knelt beside her. "I am not going to hurt you," Perrin said calmly. "But it is broken, and I will have to cut the beam." She narrowed her eyes. "You following me?" "No," he said. "But I might have been watching." Her breath caught. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because you are trying to build a cabin alone. And I thought someone should make sure you do not die doing it. I am not your concern." "Maybe not," he said, already sawing through the end of the log trapping her. "But I am helping anyway." He worked quick, clean, lifted the beam and pulled her leg free in one motion. She bit down on a leather strap until the pain passed. He wrapped her ankle with cloth from her pack, and when she tried to stand, she nearly fell. He caught her. His arms were warm, steady. She froze. "You can lean on me," he said, voice low. "Just until you are steady." She looked up at him. His eyes were green like sunlit grass. He smelled like horses and pine sap. His jaw was rough with days-old stubble. Her heart kicked once, hard. "I do not need you need to rest," he said, gently cutting her off. "That is not weakness. That is sense." She let him lower her onto the canvas cot beneath her tarp lean-to. "I will stay the night," he said simply. "Fix what fell. Cook something. Then I will go." Susanna stared at him. "You do not even know my name." He met her eyes. "No, but I would like to." She hesitated, then gave it. "Susanna North." He nodded. "Perrin Grady." She blinked. "The cattleman?" He gave a half-smile. "I used to be. Now I am mostly just a father trying not to mess up." She did not ask more. He did not offer more. That night, he cooked beans and cornbread and they ate in silence by the fire. She watched the flames. He watched her ankle. "You are good with tools," she said. "I built my ranch house," he said. "After my wife passed, I could not stand the thought of someone else doing it." Something softened in her expression. "I know that feeling." He looked at her, really looked. "You building this for someone?" She shook her head. "Just me." He nodded once. "That is a good reason." The next morning he was gone before sunrise. But on the tree stump where she split her kindling, he had left a sack of nails, a small saw, and a note scratched in pencil on raw wood. "Let me help." She folded the note into her pocket and stared at the horizon. When he returned 2 days later with a load of split lumber and a sack of flour, she did not tell him to leave. Over the next week, they worked side by side. He lifted the heavy beams. She notched and fit each one herself. He did not try to take over. He followed her lead. He taught her how to brace the roof line and how to set stone for the hearth. She taught him how to make coffee strong enough to wake the dead. They talked little, but what they did say mattered. "My daughter," Perrin said one night, "still cries for her mama sometimes. I never know what to say." Susanna stirred the pot over the fire. "You hold her. That is what matters." "And your family?" "All gone," she said. "I am the last." His hand brushed hers by accident. She did not move away. One evening, Hayden and Hallie arrived. His sister had come down sick, and Perrin had no choice but to bring them. Susanna froze when the wagon rolled up. But when Hallie stumbled on the path, Susanna caught her before she hit the ground. "Careful, sweetheart," she said softly, brushing dirt from the girl's cheek. Hallie blinked up at her. "Are you going to marry my papa?" Susanna flushed scarlet. Perrin looked like he forgot how to breathe. Susanna cleared her throat. "We are just building a cabin." Hallie grinned. "But he smiles at you." Susanna glanced at Perrin. He was watching her with that same steady look he always had, but something in his eyes had changed. That night, after the children were asleep, Perrin stood at the edge of the clearing, hands on his hips, staring up at the stars. Susanna joined him. "You have good kids," she said. He nodded. "They deserve better than a man who does not know how to fix everything." Susanna looked at him. "They just need someone who stays." Perrin turned toward her, slow. "And what about you? What do you need?" She hesitated. "I thought I needed to do it all alone. But now I am not so sure." His hand brushed hers again. This time she laced her fingers through his. Neither of them said anything else. But in the quiet, something shifted. The next morning, they started building the porch together. The porch came together slower than the rest. Not for lack of wood or will, but because it asked for precision. Each slat measured and leveled, the angles just right so rain wouldn't pool. Perrin handled the cuts, Susanna the placement. They said little, but the quiet between them had grown easy, like the hush before dawn when the world waits, not fearing what comes next. Hallie sat near the edge of the clearing, weaving scraps of cloth into a crooked braid. Hayden busied himself collecting flat stones for the steps. Neither interrupted. They'd learned the rhythm here: work, rest, silence, then supper. The days had turned warmer and the trees were full green now. Each evening the light stretched longer across the valley floor, casting everything in a golden hush. "You always wanted to live out this far?" Perrin asked one afternoon as he set down the hammer. Susanna wiped her brow with the edge of her sleeve. "Not always. But once I saw it, I couldn't let it go." He leaned against the porch post, arms crossed. "What made you come this way?" She hesitated, eyes on the tree lean. "I needed land that didn't come with someone's name already carved into it. This place no one laid claim before me. No ghosts here." "Not even yours?" he asked gently. She met his gaze. "I brought those with me." Perrin didn't press further. Instead, he stepped down and began setting the next support beam. She followed, measuring the angle without words. They understood each other in the way people do when they've both known loss that doesn't fade with time. That evening, Hayden sat beside Susanna as she mended Hallie's stocking. He watched her needle move, careful and steady. "You sew like my ma used to," he said, voice low. She looked over at him, surprised. "Did she teach you any?" He nodded once. "A little. I was small, but I remember." Susanna passed him the thread. "Want to try?" He took it without speaking, tongue pressed to his lip as he worked the needle through the cloth. The stitch was crooked, but she didn't correct him. Perrin watched from the fire pit, his hands stilled over the pan. The sight of his boy beside her, calm in a way he hadn't been in months, pulled something loose in his chest. He didn't say anything until the children were asleep in their bedrolls beneath the lean-to. "She's good with them," he said as Susanna joined him at the fire. "Better than I've seen in a long time." She shrugged. I didn't think I'd be. You never wanted children? He asked, careful not to crowd her. I did, she answered. Once. But I was told it wasn't likely. Doctors don't know everything, but they know enough. Perrin looked at her face, the way the firelight caught the curve of her cheek and the line of her jaw. You'd have made a fine mother. She didn't look at him. That's not something I need to be told. I know, he said. Wasn't meant as comfort. Just truth. They sat quiet for a time. A coyote called in the distance, long and lonely. If I leave, he said after a while, will you keep going alone? She nodded. I've come this far. But would you want to? She turned to face him now, her expression unreadable. That's not what I'm used to asking myself. He didn't push. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small tin. What's that? She asked. He opened it to reveal a handful of apple seeds, dry and pale. From the trees near my old place. Thought I'd plant them here. She blinked. Why? Because they take years to bear fruit, he said. And I don't bring them anywhere I don't plan to stay. She held his gaze for a long time, something shifting between them that had nothing to do with words or firelight. Then plant them tomorrow, she said softly. The next morning he did. He cleared a patch near the edge of the meadow, just where the sun lingered longest in the day's last hour. He knelt in the dirt, Hayden beside him with a small spade. Hallie picked tiny stones from the rows while Susanna stood nearby, hands folded, not interrupting. When the last seed was buried, Perrin stood and brushed the soil from his palms. They'll take patience, he said. I have that, Susanna replied. Later that day, she handed him a folded piece of parchment. What's this? He asked. The deed, she said. It's in my name, but I want your name on the back. If something happens, I don't want it that way, he interrupted, voice low but firm. Not unless I'm here to earn it. She looked at him a long moment. Then stay long enough to. That night, as the wind stirred the trees and the stars blinked wide above them, she reached for his hand beneath the quilt. He didn't speak, just turned his palm upward and closed his fingers around hers. The porch stood finished, the apple seeds nestled in soil, and the cabin strong, square, and hers had begun to feel like something more than shelter. It had begun to feel like home. By mid-June, the walls inside the cabin wore a coat of whitewash, and the hearthstone had dried solid. Rain had come twice that week, and both times the roof had held. Susanna no longer started awake at the sound of wind. Each board and beam around her had been set with care, and she knew the feel of them the way one knows the weight of their own coat or the sound of their own step on loose gravel. The children slept in the larger of the two rooms now. Perrin had added shelves and pegs, and Hallie hung her ribbon bonnet there each night as though it had always belonged. Hayden took to carving small animals from whittled wood. A fox, a mule deer, a long-legged hound. He set them along the windowsill without speaking of them. Susanna woke early that morning before the birds began their song. She stood barefoot on the cool floor and watched the mist hang low across the meadow. Perrin was already outside, splitting kindling with slow, even strokes. He hadn't spoken much the night before, not out of distance, but something else she couldn't name. She stepped onto the porch, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. You sleep any? She asked, voice low. He paused, the axe still in his hand. Some. You. Enough. He nodded but didn't look up. She stepped down into the grass, letting the dew soak through her hem. You've been quiet. He wiped his palms on his trousers and leaned the axe against the porch rail. I had a letter from my brother. She tilted her head, waiting. He's been offered a parcel near Bozeman. Wants me to sell him the old ranch. She blinked once. Will you? I don't want to, he said. But I think I need to. Because of the children? Because of me. He looked up at her then, and something in his face was different, not uncertain, but raw. I kept that place for what it used to be. I didn't want to let go of her. Of the life we had. But every time I walk through it, I feel what's missing more than what's left. Susanna nodded once, slowly. Being here, he said, feels like something new. Like I'm not just remembering anymore. She stepped closer, the grass soft underfoot. You don't owe her silence, Perrin. Grief doesn't vanish. But it doesn't mean you stop living. He reached for her hand, not quickly, but like he'd been thinking on it for some time. I want to stay, he said, his thumb brushing lightly against her knuckles. Not just until the roof's sound or the fence line's finished. I want to be here. With you. She didn't pull away. And the children? They already are. She looked back toward the cabin. The light from the window caught Hallie's ribbon, swaying gently from the peg. I never planned on this, she said. I know. But I want it. His hand tightened around hers. Then we'll build it together. Later that day, Perrin rode into Stevensville to file the sale papers for his old place. He took Hayden with him, the boy sitting straight beside him on the wagon bench, a small pouch of carved animals tucked under his arm. Susanna and Hallie spent the afternoon planting sage and columbine along the edge of the porch. The girl hummed to herself as she worked, pressing the roots deep into the soil with her small hands. Will they bloom this year? Hallie asked. Maybe, Susanna said. But if they don't, they will next spring. They fell into silence, the kind that sits easy between people who trust each other. When the sun sank low and the wagon returned, Hallie ran to meet them, her arms flung wide. Hayden climbed down, then turned and offered his hand to Perrin like a grown man would. Susanna watched them from the porch, and when Perrin looked up at her, she saw something in his face she hadn't seen before: rest. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, they sat by the hearth. The fire cracked, low and steady. Susanna leaned against his shoulder, her fingers twined with his. You think the apple trees will take? She asked. I do, he said. They've got good ground now. She closed her eyes, listening to the wind shift through the eaves. He kissed her temple, slow and sure. And neither of them had to say it aloud. They weren't alone anymore. By early July, the cabin looked settled into the land, as though it had always belonged there. The tall grass had bent around the porch steps, and the first wildflowers had taken root along the southern edge where Hallie had pressed seeds into the loam with her palms. Evenings came slower now, drawn out with the heat, and the mountains kept the light long after the sun dipped behind them. Susanna stood at the edge of the field behind the cabin, squinting toward the rise where the slope grew rocky. She held a folded scrap of paper in one hand, her thumb brushing the corner. The ink had faded in spots, but she knew every word by memory. Her mother's handwriting, neat and steady. A list of plants that thrived in dry soil. Notes about lining cellar walls with straw. A final line in the margin, build something no wind can take. She turned at the sound of boots behind her. Perrin came to stand beside her, dust on his sleeves, a coil of fencing wire slung across his chest. You planning to put in a root cellar? I've been thinking on it, she said, folding the paper again. Wouldn't hurt to have a place that stays cool come August. He nodded, glancing down the slope. Ground's firm here. You'd hit rock, but I can help with that. She tucked the scrap into her skirt pocket. I want it close enough to the house I can reach it come winter without fighting a drift. I'll mark where the sun falls. See where the frost lingers longest, he said. We'll dig it proper. She looked at him, and something flickered behind her eyes. You still say we without thinking. His brow creased. You don't want me to? She shook her head. No. I just still notice. That afternoon they began clearing the earth, cutting sod and setting it aside in neat squares. Hayden took to measuring with a length of string while Hallie gathered flat stones near the creek for lining the walls. No one asked her to. Later, Susanna sat on the porch with her needle and thread, stitching canvas sacks for grain storage. She paused when Perrin came up the steps, his shirt damp with sweat, his collar darkened. I stopped by Lyman's place, he said, lowering himself onto the bench beside her. He has a hand plow he's willing to trade for some cured meat. She raised an eyebrow. You think I'm planting already? He tilted his head. You've cleared the land behind the barn. That wasn't just for walking room. She gave a quiet laugh. No, it wasn't. He leaned back, stretching his legs. I could take the wagon to Corvallis next week. Pick up seed if you've got a list. She threaded her needle again and kept her eyes on her work. You're not just staying the summer, are you? He didn't answer right away. I've been thinking about building a lean-to on the far side of the barn. Just enough space to store tack and tools. Maybe a cot. That's not an answer. He turned, met her eyes. I'm not going anywhere. I'd rather sleep on the ground here than under a roof somewhere else. She nodded once, then went back to her stitching. That night, after the children had gone to bed and the fire had burned low, she stood by the hearth, her hand resting lightly on the mantel. I never thought I'd see someone else's boots by my door, she said. It used to feel like letting someone in meant giving something up. Perrin watched her from the chair near the corner, his elbows resting on his knees. And now it feels like sharing the weight. He rose, slow and quiet, and walked to her. You've carried more than most ever have to. That doesn't mean you always have to. She looked up at him. I don't know how to be soft with someone. You don't have to be softer, he said. You just have to let me stand beside you. She reached for his hand without hesitation this time. The next morning, Perrin hitched the wagon and drove north to trade for the plow. Susanna stayed behind with the children. She and Hayden took turns digging while Hallie lined the cellar wall with stones and pressed wild thyme between the cracks. When he returned, Hallie ran out to meet him, waving a small bunch of yellow clover. Hayden helped unload the plow, his shoulders squared like he'd grown taller in a day. Susanna stood at the porch rail, brushing dust from her apron. Perrin handed her a small cloth pouch. Seeds, he said. Corn, beans, sorghum. And I found a woman selling dried peach pits. Said if you plant them now, they might take root by fall. She opened the pouch, her eyes catching on the pale shapes inside. Peaches don't grow easy here. They don't, he said. But they do if the soil's deep and the wind's kept off. She looked up at him. We'll try then. He touched her shoulder just once. We will. That evening, she wrote a new line on the back of her mother's paper. There's more than one way to build a home. Then she folded it, tucked it in the cupboard beside the salt jar, and turned to help Perrin stack wood for the coming season. The first frost came early that year. Not sharp, but enough to silver the tops of the taller grass and turn the air brittle before the sun reached the ridge. Susanna stood at the cabin window, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of chicory. She watched as Perrin and Hayden hauled the last of the firewood beneath the lean-to, their breaths visible in brief puffs. Hallie sat cross-legged on the porch behind them, threading dried berries onto a string for the cellar. Inside, the floorboards had taken on the smell of smoke and cedar. The walls bore the small signs of a lived-in-place: boots by the door, a folded shawl on the chair, Hayden's knife resting on the sill. Susanna had begun to feel it in her chest, a steadiness where there used to be only bracing. Perrin stepped in, shaking the cold from his collar. Snow's sitting on the peaks. Won't be long now. She nodded. The preserves are sealed. Root cellar's full. We're ready. He looked around the room, his eyes catching on the shelf where Hallie's ribbon now hung beside a horseshoe and Susanna's folded work apron. This place feels different than I expected. How so? Like it was always meant for more than one pair of boots. She turned, setting the mug down. I never thought I'd share it. I didn't know how to make room. You didn't have to, he said. You just didn't shut the door when we knocked. The children came in just as the light shifted on the floor, Hallie carrying the berry string over her arm. Hayden with a fresh nick on his thumb and an apologetic look. Susanna fetched the salve from the cupboard without fuss, wrapped his hand, and pressed a kiss to his knuckles when she was done. He didn't flinch. That evening, they lit the lanterns early, the sky gone pale with cloud cover. Perrin brought in a bundle of pheasant feathers he'd found along the fence line and passed them to Hallie, who grinned and tucked one behind her ear like a bonnet pin. Susanna kneaded dough for biscuits while Hayden stirred the stew, careful not to splash. After supper, Perrin pulled the fiddle from its case, a gift from his uncle, forgotten for years. He'd tuned it the week before, late one night, and now drew the bow across with a hesitant steadiness. The song was rough but familiar, a slow reel that filled the room with something softer than sound. Hallie danced in place, her skirts brushing the floor, and Hayden tapped one boot against the hearthstone. Susanna watched them, her hands resting still in her lap. Perrin caught her eye and lifted his brows. You know this one? I used to, she said. My mother played it when the rains came late. He stepped closer, offering the fiddle in both hands. Then play it again. She hesitated, then rose and took it. The instrument settled against her collar like it remembered her. She closed her eyes, drew a long note, and let the music rise. The children stilled, listening. Perrin leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his expression unreadable but steady. When the piece ended, the room held quiet for a moment too long. Then Hallie clapped. Perrin stepped forward and reached for her hand. Play it again. She smiled, slow and sure, and began. The next morning, snow fell in thick, slow flakes. They gathered at the window to watch the meadow disappear beneath white. It was the first time Hallie had seen snow fall from a warm room, and she pressed her palms to the glass, laughing at the fog her breath made. By midday, it was too deep to venture far, so they brought in the drying herbs from the porch and strung them in the kitchen. Susanna taught Hallie to twist cord from flax, and Hayden took to carving a chess set from scrapwood. Perrin began framing a cradle in the back room, saying little about it, but measuring twice and shaping each slat with care. At dusk, Susanna stepped outside to shake the snow from the lean-to roof. The air was sharp and her breath caught in her throat. Perrin joined her, wrapping a scarf around her shoulders without a word. "I didn't think I'd want another winter," she said. "Not after the last." "This one's different," he said. She looked at him. "Because you're here?" "No," he said. "Because you let yourself stay." She turned in toward him, her hands resting just above his belt. "I want this," she said quietly. "Not just the cabin. Not just the quiet. I want you." His answer came without pause. "Then I'm yours." He kissed her there in the snow, their breath mingling in the cold, his hands steady against her spine. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't shy. It was the kind of promise that didn't need words. They married in early spring, standing beneath the alder trees behind the cabin. Hallie wove a crown of dried flowers, and Hayden carried the carved fox in his pocket like a talisman. There was no preacher. They'd both buried faith in different ways, but they spoke the vows they'd written in the language of shared work and steady hands. He offered her a ring made from braided horsehair and silver. She gave him the fiddle string she kept from that first night. By the time the apple trees bloomed, the cradle held a sleeping child with dark hair and quiet eyes. Hallie sang to her sister each morning, and Hayden carved a bear from cedar to guard the cradle's edge. The peach pit sprouted late, just one among the row of apple saplings, but it held. And so did they.